Hi everyone, welcome again to my YouTube channel. Today is part 2 of my sleep series, and this is where we're going to focus on all of the tools and therapies that I most often use to help people with their sleep. What you're going to notice is that I'm going to cover a lot of things really quickly. It's not meant to be a deep dive on any of these therapies, but rather a broad overview to get you thinking about the different therapies that may be helpful for the different reasons you're not sleeping. And even though I'm rapid firing through a lot of this, I found that it was still too much to fit into one video. So part 2 is going to be broken into 2 separate videos so I have enough time to cover everything. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, I highly recommend going back and watching it because it's going to provide a lot of context on which therapies might be most helpful, because there I give some ideas as to what's causing your sleep ailments. And if you understand the cause, you can select therapies or work with a therapist to select therapies that are most suited for you. Because ultimately, like anything health related, you want to get to the root cause of what is causing your sleep issues. And so I am by no stretch saying try all of these things that I'm going to mention. So what you really want to start asking yourself isn't what can I take, but it's what is causing my sleep to become an issue. And then once you answer that question, you can start to think about what you can take. So that's part 1. Today we're going over the tools and the therapies. So before we jump into all of that though, please let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Robin Lewis. I'm a naturopathic physician practicing here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And today we're going over some of my favorite tools and therapies for sleep. And the first place that I want to start with this video is talking about the lifestyle factors, aka the behaviors that promote good or bad sleep. So an example of this would be, what are you doing before bed? So there are things that you can do before bed that are very conducive to good quality sleep, and there are others that are completely the opposite. So if I'm thinking about things you're doing before bed, I want to really highlight, what are you doing before bed that stresses you out? So these can be big stressors or small stressors. It could be things like working too late, trying to hit deadlines, making that call to that family member who stresses you out, watching a scary movie. Honestly, there are a lot of different things that could potentially stress you out before bed. And these are the things that you really want to avoid. And that is because stress releases something called cortisol, which is coined as our stress hormone. And it can also release things like adrenaline if it's bad enough. But the point is, things like cortisol keep you mentally stimulated. And they work on a 24-hour clock, which is generally referred to as our circadian rhythm. And so cortisol actually should be highest first thing in the morning, as I discussed in part 1. It's something that helps us feel mentally alert. So that is something you want during the day and not something you necessarily want before bed. So if you keep doing things that cause you to release cortisol at night, eventually this will create a shift in the body where your body starts to think that that's an appropriate time to release cortisol. So it won't actually drop your cortisol like it should, allowing you to fall asleep. So in the short term, maybe it just affects that one night. But in the long term, if you keep doing these things, if you keep engaging in stressful activities before bed, you can throw off that hormone, and then it becomes a much bigger issue. And then it's not just as simple as stop doing these things, but maybe you have to start even taking a supplement or something like that to try and course correct because it's been going on for so long. So ultimately, it's just, what are you doing before bed? And if there is high or low stressors, doing anything you can to try and mitigate that and lower that before bed will be very helpful. Now, if we take this concept one step further, it's important to note that your body really likes consistency, because if it's going to release these hormones at certain times of the day, the more consistent you are, the more it understands when to do that appropriately. So this is where having a regular bedtime and a regular wake time are incredibly helpful. So if you're constantly changing the time you go to bed and the time you wake up, it gets confusing for the body. So let's talk about daytime cortisol, for example. You should get a peak in your cortisol first thing in the morning. But if you wake up at 5 a.m. sometimes and 8 a.m. other times, it won't really know which time to release that cortisol. And so you may find that it's releasing too early and that'll wake you up before your alarm clock. Or it'll release too late and you'll have a really hard time getting out of bed, be extremely groggy in the morning. And part of that is because your body doesn't know when to release these hormones because there's no consistency. And so it will sometimes maybe do it appropriately and likely start to do it at inappropriate times because there's no consistency in your schedule. So that's another thing to think about. Another really important thing that helps us have very high quality sleep is sleeping in complete darkness. So sometimes we have light coming in through the window, whether that be sunlight because of certain times of the year or street lights. Your body likes complete darkness, and it especially does not like light before bed, but especially blue light. And so that's the type of light that actually looks blue. You see it used on a lot of screens. So our devices are really bad for blue light. Even the screens of our alarm clocks are typically emitting blue light. The dashboard of your car, blue light is a really popular light. It looks really cool, but what it doesn't do is promote good sleep. It actually blocks something like melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And so having a good habit of putting those blue lights away before bed, or if that's not always realistic, do things to lessen the blue light. So a really good example of this is the apps that we put on our phones to filter out blue light before bed. So in the case of iPhone, this is something like the Flux app, or they actually have a feature built in called night mode. And these are filtering blue light closer to bedtime. So you tell that device, I go to bed at 10 o'clock every night, and it'll stop emitting blue light closer towards bedtime. And Androids also have an app called Twilight that will do the exact same thing. So if you really got to be on your phone, at least you have something filtering out the light, trying to mitigate the damage that could potentially happen. Moving on to the next thing, our body likes to sleep in a cooler environment. This is why when we're in the thick of summer and maybe you don't have some air con, you really have a hard time sleeping. It's because a drop in core body temperature is actually very good for good quality sleep, allowing you to fall into deep stages of sleep. So of course that could mean, yes, changing the temperature of the environment in which you sleep, but then other tricky, cool ways that you can lower your core body temperature is actually doing something to heat it up before bed. So baths and saunas are a very good example of this. You're extremely warm if you're in the bath or the sauna, really sweating things out. And what that does is once you get out of the bath, it actually reflexively will cool you off because your body was trying to find some equilibrium. You were surrounding your body by a ton of warm water, and that actually drops your core body temperature to prevent overheating. So things like that are actually really helpful before bed because yes, it is technically warming you up while you're in it, but then they have found that your core body temperature is actually a little bit lower, which will help you fall asleep quicker and stay in that deep sleep. And then the last habit that I want to mention is actually going to bed only when you're sleepy. So this mostly pertains to people who really struggle to fall asleep. And this is more of coming at it from like a psychology standpoint. But if you go to bed and lie in bed for hours staring at the ceiling, you're going to negatively associate your bed with that uncomfortable trying to fall asleep sensation. And so what a lot of experts will actually tell you to do is only go to bed when you're actually sleepy. So yes, on one hand, I'm telling you, try to have a consistent bedtime. But on the other hand, I'm telling you, if you really don't feel sleepy, lying in bed for hours is not very helpful, and it can actually worsen things in the long run. And so waiting until you are sleepy, until you're feeling like your eyes are starting to drag, then you go into bed. So even if you are struggling to fall asleep, going back out into your living room, doing some, again, relaxing things, but not necessarily lying in bed for longer than 20 minutes is actually going to help you have a better relationship with your bed. So that's all I'm going to say on the habit side of things. Realistically, a good bedtime routine should only take around 15 to 30 minutes, which, yes, I understand is work in the beginning, but it's going to give you hours of better quality sleep in the long run, which is massively important for your overall health. So I promise you it's worth it. And once you get over the stage of forming the habit, it does become a lot easier, and then you fall asleep like clockwork, which is such a treat. So that's all I'll say on the habit formation side of things. Now let's talk about supplements. And this is the part where I had to break it into another episode. So when I talk about supplements today, I'm only going to be referring to the supplements that are nutrient based. And then next episode, I will talk about some of the herbs that I use, because I will either use one or the other or a combo product of the two, and they all can have very interesting impacts on sleep. So let's talk about the nutrient-based supplements that I use a lot of. The first one I'm going to talk about is probably one of my most prescribed supplements as a whole, because it's so useful for so many things, and that is magnesium. In fact, I actually did an entire episode just on magnesium. So if you're looking into this, I highly recommend looking at that video, because I obviously expand a lot more in there. But if we talk about magnesium from a sleep standpoint, it's very helpful because it acts as a muscle relaxant, and it's really good at promoting the GABA system, which is our calming neurochemical. And so ultimately, it just really helps relax us at night. And it is also a very common deficiency, even in healthy individuals. We use a lot of magnesium in various different processes throughout our body, and it's incredibly important for promoting relaxation before bed, relaxing the muscles, but also relaxing the nervous system. And if we look at some of the sleep parameters that it can help, in some people, it helps prevent them from waking up too early, helps them fall asleep quicker, improves total sleep time and sleep efficiency. Now, a lot of studies have actually looked at it in the context of sleep and anxiety because, as I mentioned before, it works really well on the GABA system, which is our calming system. And so very big implications on both anxiety and sleep. And so when they did a whole peer review of these type of studies, they found that 5 out of the 8 studies showed improvement to sleep, and 5 out of 7 studies showed improvement to anxiety. So perhaps this is the type of patient that it's good for, someone who is a little bit more anxious, a lot of tension, both mentally, emotionally, and physically, might be a good candidate for magnesium. Now, there's different types of magnesium, and you'll see kind of all types being used in various different sleep formulations. But generally speaking, I'm looking for a magnesium bisglycinate or a magnesium threonate. Both are very good for different kind of reasons. The threonate's supposed to be a little bit better for the brain, better blood-brain crossing. And then the bisglycinate, also very well absorbed, very good at muscle relaxation. And I've used both for sleep, and I find both helpful. So I would say either or are useful for most people. Another compound that can work similar to magnesium is something called glycine, and that's because it is also very calming to the nervous system. It's a very well-known amino acid that has an inhibitory effect on overstimulation of the brain, again, helping calm the brain before bed. And when they looked at this in human studies and using only a very small conservative dose of 3 grams of glycine before bed, they noticed subjective improvements to sleep quality and better daytime energy. And when they looked at this in animal models, they found more specifically that it improved REM sleep, which again, if you want to know a little bit more about that, I covered it in part 1. but more REM sleep is generally conducive to better quality sleep, and it also improved their ability to fall asleep, as well as a decrease in core body temperature. So 3 different ways to improve sleep. Again, that was an animal study, but I will say glycine does have pretty good research when it comes to improving daytime energy after using it as a sleep supplement. So of course, that is suggestive that it's really improving the quality of your sleep in these individuals. Now, the next one I want to talk about doesn't have a ton of good research on sleep specifically, but is very good at lowering cortisol, which is one of the main reasons I see people struggling to fall asleep. And that is something called phosphatidylserine. And phosphatidylserine, again, it's another type of nutrient that is really helpful for lowering cortisol. But even though the majority of the research is talking about more of a subjective improvement to stress, when they dosed it at night in one of the studies using 300 milligrams of phosphatidylserine, they noticed improvements in stress management as well as mood the next day. And so they're not always studying, how much REM sleep, how much deep sleep can be improved with this molecule. I will say there's not really studies on that specifically. But if you can reduce stress, and if stress is a big driver of your sleep problems, then again, this is something that I may or may not want to use that for that person. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is fairly obvious, but it is quite controversial. There's a lot of polarizing opinions on this one, and that is melatonin. For those of you who are unfamiliar, melatonin is our sleep hormone, so it's something that we want high amounts of at night, allowing us to fall asleep. And a lot of people have different opinions on this one, but I will say it's fairly good, especially if you need to reset your circadian rhythm. So say you're switching time zones, right? You are traveling and now you're trying to go to bed at a different time. Your body hasn't quite gotten the memo that we're supposed to release hormones at various different times now that we're on this new schedule. So melatonin is really helpful for those sort of situations, getting over jet lag sort of situations. So I think that's a pretty strong argument for melatonin. The other thing to consider is our melatonin levels will decline as we age. This is a very well-known phenomenon. And so a lot of people will notice as they get older, they actually respond a little bit better to melatonin. And there are really good studies to say that it improves the quality of your sleep. It improves REM sleep, the duration of sleep. The issue is some people just don't tolerate melatonin very well. They'll get a lot of excessive fatigue the morning after, and a lot of that has to do with doing too much melatonin at night and a really poor quality melatonin. So ultimately, melatonin can be helpful. I do want to note that it will not shut down your natural production of it. I know that is one of the common concerns people will have. Well, if I take melatonin, my body will stop producing melatonin. It doesn't really work like that, but I will say it's not something I prescribe a lot of. Okay, just quickly, the other 2 nutrients that I want to have time to cover are theanine and GABA. Again, very much working on this calming the body down. We really want to unwind and calm the body down, and both of those molecules will do it. Theanine, for example, is another amino acid. So similar to glycine, which is an amino acid, this is a type of protein or a type of amino acid found within protein that has a very good effect on GABA as well as serotonin, which is our happy chemical, and a lot of antidepressants that are promoting serotonin production are also used for sleep. So serotonin and GABA are very good at promoting good sleep, and theanine is supposed to be helping promote those. Now, GABA itself, it's in the name, it promotes GABA, it is GABA. So both can be used interchangeably. Some people respond better to one versus the other for whatever reason, even though the use of them is very similar. And interestingly enough, they actually looked at a study where they combined the 2 of those things with twice as much theanine versus GABA. And they actually found that quality of sleep was better when you had both versus just GABA or just theanine. So those are like the main nutrient-based supplements that I use. Again, in the next episode, I'll cover some of the herbal remedies and cover some of the nutritional things that could be impacting your sleep. But as you can see, a lot of these supplements are really geared towards calming anxiety, calming stress, calming the nervous system. The point is we want to be very relaxed, whether that be mentally, physically, or both before bed. I hope you found today very helpful. If you have any questions about clarifying the contents of today's video, please ask those. But again, I will emphasize, I cannot answer your direct medical questions. I cannot tell you what to do. That is not the point of this platform. Thank you so much for all of your support. And please stay tuned for the second part of part 2.